Right now, the narrative around artificial intelligence is split. On one side, it's an existential threat to every white-collar job. On the other, it's a gimmick that can barely draft a coherent email. The space between those two extremes is incredibly murky. 30 days ago, I decided to test where the actual boundary lies. I stopped doing my actual job manually. Instead, I handed off my daily tasks, content research, writing, planning, and coordination, entirely to AI. I set one absolute rule. Before I could do any task myself, I had to attempt it using artificial intelligence first. I was only allowed to step in and take over if the machine completely failed to produce usable results after a reasonable effort. Finding objective truth here requires looking past a single chat window. Effective, real-world work means chaining different specialized tools together, and I wanted to see exactly what a full stack of these systems could actually handle. To keep the results objective, I mapped every single task onto this matrix. Tasks fell into 4 categories: completed successfully without intervention, completed but required editing, failed entirely, and completely unsuited. Tracking this required a multi-tool stack, linking AI reasoning models for research, automation platforms for repetitive data entry, and scheduling agents for calendar management. It is important to define the exact boundary of this test. If your job is highly physical, deeply relational, or requires specialized hands-on expertise, these results won't translate perfectly. This experiment strictly targeted knowledge work, the exact type of screen-based coordination and planning that AI is heavily favored to absorb. The first week was deeply humbling. Tasks that seemed straightforward on paper required endless correction. I would ask for a detailed research summary, and the AI would generate something structurally perfect, yet entirely devoid of the specific contextual nuances I actually needed. Vague instructions produced the chaotic cluster on the left. This was a failure of communication, not a limit of the technology's capability. I was assuming the system could read between the lines. I changed my approach. I began providing heavy upfront context, rigid constraints, and highly specific examples of the desired output. Once I did that, the success rate for complex tasks climbed drastically. AI cannot infer unstated human intent. To get high-level output, the user must provide explicit, heavily structured context from the start. By week 2, providing that depth of context established a consistent, effective rhythm. The AI produced excellent first drafts, rapidly structured raw data, and synthesized vast research without issue. But this momentum also revealed the first hard boundary line of the experiment. There was a specific class of tasks that consistently crashed, regardless of how perfectly I engineered the prompt. Anytime a task required making a judgment call based on an ongoing professional relationship, or weighing competing priorities that I hadn't explicitly written down, the machine was paralyzed. It lacked the invisible context that humans build over time. This exposed a core structural divide in modern work. There is a massive difference between completing a clearly defined, pattern-based task, which is execution, and making a situational, context-dependent choice, which is judgment. Week 3 hit an even larger obstacle. When I tried to use AI to manage project coordination between multiple team members, the workflow completely broke down. The tools were completely blind to unstated social dynamics. They couldn't read the tone of an evolving situation, or recognize when a colleague needed a lighter touch versus direct urgency. You can see the divide perfectly in this layout. AI provided massive acceleration in execution speed once a decision was made, but in an ambiguous environment, deciding what actually needed to be executed in the first place resulted in total paralysis for the machine. Situational awareness exists entirely outside of documents and spreadsheets. It is built from ongoing human relationships, making interpersonal coordination a strictly human requirement. By the final week, the extreme goal of total automation gave way to a sustainable hybrid workflow. I stopped fighting the friction and leaned into a new division of labor. The AI absorbed the research, the initial drafting, and the repetitive execution. This allowed my time to shift almost entirely into cognitive management, reviewing outputs, refining strategies, and handling the complex relationship coordination that the machine couldn't touch. This finalized system stripped away the mechanical output, effectively upgrading my role to focus exclusively on higher-order decision-making. This chart visualizes the final empirical metric of the 30-day trial. By the end of the experiment, roughly 60. If your daily work consists entirely of pattern-based execution with minimal judgment required, that work is in immediate danger of being automated right now, not in 5 years, today. Conversely, roles that heavily rely on navigating situational context, managing relationships, and making complex, ambiguous decisions remain highly defensible against current technology. The practical takeaway here isn't generic advice like learn to code. The actual defense is aggressively auditing your own daily schedule. Look at your tasks and divide them into 2 buckets. Identify the execution bucket and actively seek out tools to automate it. Then, identify your judgment bucket and put all energy into mastering and showcasing those specific skills. Surviving the transition to AI-assisted work requires deliberately outsourcing your mechanical output, because the faster you can hand off the execution, the more time you have to elevate your deeply human judgment.